Good morning, everyone. I'm Isabelle Falconier. I'm Geneva Press Club Director. Welcome to everyone here in the Geneva Press Club, and welcome to those online too. We are very pleased to welcome the Geneva-based NGO MENA Rights Group, defending and promoting fundamental rights and freedoms in the Middle East and North Africa region, and the Emirates Detainee Center, SENID, to a Human Rights Council side event entitled A Long Way to Go for Human Rights in the UAE, Results of the UN Periodic Review. I will now give the floor to Falah Sahed. She's a human rights officer at MENA Rights Group. She will present the speakers and moderate this event. Falah, you have the floor. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you so much, Isabelle. And thank you so much for everyone attending online and in person. So I don't want to speak too much since you are here to listen to the panelists. Just maybe to recap a little bit what we'll be talking about. We are here to discuss the UPR outcome of the UAE. The UAE has undergone its fourth cycle. For those who are not very familiar with this mechanism, the Universal Periodic Review is a peer review by which the human rights record of each state, of each member state of the UN is reviewed. And basically it's a peer review process because it's not done by an independent mechanism. It's done by the states themselves. They review each other. And over one cycle, each state under review is given recommendations to improve on certain human rights issues. And then this state has the possibility to either reject these recommendations or accept them. And the UAE has actually just undergone its fourth cycle of the UPR. And on May 8th, it received recommendations from UN member states. And yesterday, October 3rd, the UAE formally responded to these recommendations by accepting or refusing the recommendations. A diplomatic way to refuse recommendation is to note them, which is why we use the word noting. So actually this cycle was, quite crucial for the UAE because, as we all know, the UAE has increasingly been put under the spotlight, hosting international events such as Dubai Expo and now COP28. And yet, the UAE has quite a problematic human rights record, to say the least. And especially since 2011, we've seen an increasing crackdown on public dissent and an increasing use of surveillance technology. And yet, despite this abysmal record, we saw that the UAE has rejected 40% of the recommendations that were made during the UPR. Including some crucial recommendations about freedom of expression, the protection of human rights defenders, and the use of torture. I don't want to speak too much, so I will now, give the floor to our panelists. First of all, I will give the floor to Mary Lawlor, who's the Special Rapporteur on Human Rights Defenders, who will be addressing us through a video statement. And we'll be hearing about her mandate and what her mandate has done with respect to the protection of human rights defenders.
Thank you for inviting me to the event around the response by the United Arab Emirates to recommendations made by the working group of the UPR. The UAE's last review was in May of this year, and I see from the recommendations made that the UAE still hasn't addressed a number of issues since its last review in 2018. At the time, the UAE received 7 recommendations specifically addressing human rights defenders, and it supported 5 of them. They included the protection of human rights defenders and a guarantee that the anti-terrorist law does not hamper the work of defenders. This year, the number of recommendations to the UAE is 14, out of which it has accepted 6, but took note of 8. Among those 8 are recommendations to investigate arbitrary detention and torture cases, allow a safe environment for human rights defenders to share information with UN mechanisms, and again, end the use of counter-terrorism laws against human rights defenders. Last but not least is the recommendation to unconditionally release from prison all human rights defenders and prisoners of conscience. Sadly, since 2018 to the present, my mandate has led or joined at least 5 communications to the government of the United Arab Emirates, which highlight the lack of protection afforded to human rights defenders. They were related to alleged ill treatment, continued arbitrary detention, and long-term imprisonment of human rights defenders. The inclusion of human rights defenders on a terrorism list, and concerns over a counter-terrorism law which appears to contradict international human rights norms. It has been used to charge human rights defenders with offences that carry lengthy prison sentences. My 2021 report to the UN General Assembly on the long-term detention of human rights defenders included 6 who were held by the United Arab Emirates. Until today, the same 6 human rights defenders remain held, nearly all well beyond the date for their release, despite having served over 10-year sentences. They include Mohammed al-Raqan, a lawyer and academic who provided legal assistance to other human rights defenders detained for their criticism of government policies, who was due to be freed more than a year ago. Like him, Salam al-Shehi and Hadaf Rashid al-Owais are held more than a year after their release date. Dr. Mohammed al-Mansour's release date was the 16th of July 2023, and Mr. Ali al-Kindi was due to be freed on the 10th of September. We are waiting to see if the UAE will release on time Mr. Hassan Mohammadi al-Hamad, who on the 30th of January 2024 ends his 10-year sentence and an added 15 months handed down while in prison. The defendants who are still in prison underwent a Zoom session with a judge who found that they needed to be held for counselling and rehabilitation because they still had terrorist ideas. They have had no contact with their families since early June and no visits for more than 2 years. Details about their conditions of health or exact whereabouts are not clear. They are believed to be held in Al Razin prison, located in the desert, suffering from extreme temperatures there, ill treatment and violent searches by prison guards, about which I and other special mandate holders have written to the UAE government about. Mr. al-Raqan and his colleagues in prison were sentenced under various laws, including Federal Law No. 7 of 2014 on countering terrorism. The law is vague. It fails to precisely define terrorism and uses broad wording such as opposing the country and prejudicing national unity. It also calls for the establishment of counselling and rehabilitation centres, effectively used to keep prisoners detained beyond the end of their terms. I am concerned to see that the UAE has not moved to end the use of this law against human rights defenders, despite the repeated recommendations to that effect by the Working Group on UPR. Through this video, I would like again to ask the UAE government to immediately release those 6 human rights defenders who should never have been arrested and sentenced in the first place. It is very cruel to be keeping them in prison. Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you very much to Mary Lawlor. She has touched upon very crucial issues and has highlighted the obvious lack of protection of human rights defenders. Clearly, they've been sentenced to lengthy prison sentences and subjected to arbitrary detention and enforced disappearances. And yet, only yesterday, shockingly, we saw that the UAE has rejected the recommendation to release from prison all human rights defenders. And maybe on that issue, I'll give the floor to Hamad, who will be joining us online as well. Hamad is a member of the UAE 94 mass trial, which is the biggest mass trial that has happened in the UAE. He will tell you more about it. And he's currently the executive director of the Emirates Detainee Advocacy Center. Hamad, you have the floor.
Yeah, good morning or good afternoon. Thank you, Falah. My name is Ahmed Shamsi, and I work for the Emirates Detainees Advocacy Center. And I would like to express my gratitude for providing me the opportunity to discuss the human rights situation in the United Arab Emirates. As you might know, this year the UAE underwent the Universal Periodic Review evaluation, and just yesterday, as Falah just mentioned, the Human Rights Council adopted a resolution based on the recommendations provided to the United Arab Emirates. And it is noteworthy that this year the UAE received 323 recommendations compared to 230 recommendations 5 years ago and 180 recommendations in 2013. This significant increase in recommendations over time indicate for me that there is a concerning trend. And this trend that the human rights situation in the United Arab Emirates is getting worse. 10 years ago, the number of recommendations were 180, and now we reach the number of 230 recommendations, and then 323 recommendations. While people from outside, maybe like outside the UAE, may not fully grasp the extent of how bad the human right of how bad this human rights situation, we as Emirati keenly feel the impact. We witness a worsening human rights situation in our country. The number of detainees continue to rise. Violations against them are becoming more severe, and the suffering of their families is increasing as well, unfortunately. It is important to note that the Emirati government invests heavily in media and public relations to shape an image that may mislead those outside our country. They allocate significant resources amounting to millions of dollars to downplay the human rights violation both within and outside our borders. However, it is crucial to recognize that despite these efforts, we as Emirati remain dedicated to advocate for our rights and pushing for positive change. Having said that, I would like to draw your attention to certain recommendations that the United Arab Emirates received but decided not to accept or noted. And these two recommendations I would like to highlight. The first one I would like to highlight is the recommendation from the Kingdom of Netherlands. And it says that the UAE should release all prisoners who have completed their court orders or they have completed their court order sentences and are currently being held only under the counseling provision of a 2014 counterterrorism law, as well as implementing further measures to ensure protection against torture and ill treatment in detention. Unfortunately, the UAE decided not to accept this recommendation. And I would like to give you more context of this recommendation. As I speak to you right now, there are more than 60 prisoners of conscience in the prison beyond their sentences. Most of these prisoners of conscience have completed more than 2 years in prison. Actually, some of them has completed almost 6 years in prison beyond his sentence. And this is the example of Abdullah Al-Hulu. Abdullah Al-Hulu was detained in 2014. Then he was sentenced to 3 years in prison. He served the sentence in 2017, but guess what? He's still in the prison, almost 6 years beyond his sentence. Next year, he will complete 10 years in prison, where his sentence was only 3 years in prison. This is not an isolated case. Every prisoner of conscience, almost all of them, has gone through the same procedures. They going to keep them in prison beyond their sentences. Dr. Mohammed Rukun, as Mary Lawlor just mentioned, completed his sentence in 2022. Dr. Ahmed Mansouri, Dr. Sultan bin Qaid, and many other prisoners of conscience in detention beyond their sentence. And the UAE, by rejecting this recommendation, is saying to the world that we are going to keep people in a prison beyond their sentences. They are saying to the world that we are not respecting our court order. I mean, there was a court order, and that court order was for a limited time, and the UAE is not even respecting that court order and keeping people in prison beyond their sentences. This is, this is the recommendation that, the first recommendation I wanted to highlight. The second recommendation I would like to highlight is the recommendation was given by State of Belgium. And it says, and Mary Lawlor just mentioned that one, it says that the UAE should ensure that human rights defender, including those sharing information with United Nations human rights mechanism, are able to work safely and effectively in the country, including by creating an enabling environment in which they can carry out their work on the promotion and protection of human rights. Yeah, this is very strange that the UAE is also publicly saying that we are not going to implement this recommendation. They are saying publicly that we are not going to have a safe place for human rights defenders. And Ahmed Mansour, I think most of you already heard about Ahmed Mansour. Ahmed Mansour is the last human rights defenders in the UAE, and he was a victim of this. Ahmed Mansour was sharing information with the human rights organization around the world. He was sharing information about how bad the situation inside the Emirates with the UN mechanism, and then he was detained for 10 years in prison. He was detained, then he was sentenced to 10 years in prison, plus 1 million dirham fine. 1 million dirham is around $272,000 US dollar. So Ahmed Mansour is a victim of this. Ahmed Mansour, because the UAE is not having a safe, protected space for human rights defenders, they are now detaining them because they practice their rights. This is very ironic, because the UAE is a member of the Human Rights Council. So the UAE is a member of the Human Rights Council, and they are telling the world that we are not going to cooperate with people that practicing the mechanism of the Human Rights Council. The UAE should be protecting these mechanisms, but in fact, they are not, like inside their country, not having a space for such people to practice these mechanisms. Ahmed Mansour, he was one of the victims of this, of not having a safe space inside the UAE. And also, like, UAE is going to host COP28 in almost one month from now or 2 months from now. And we know that one of the prerequisites of such event is to have a civic space inside the UAE. A free civic space inside the UAE, a protected one, but now also within the refusing of accepting this recommendation, the UAE is saying that to the world, even though we are going to host COP28, we will not have a safe space for the human rights defenders. This is I wanted to mention. The last thing I would like to mention, I would like to give you an example how bad the situation inside the Emirates in context of freedom of expression. I would like to highlight the case of Nasser bin Ghaith. Nasser bin Ghaith, he's a scholar, he academic person, and he was detained in 2015 because of a tweet. Nasser bin Ghaith in 2015, he did not criticize the UAE government. He did not criticize anything inside the UAE, but he criticized the Egyptian regime. And because of that tweet, Nasser bin Ghaith was detained, and then he was sentenced to 10 years in prison and they accused him of attacking or insulting a friendly state. Even if we going to talk about the freedom of expression in social media, this doesn't exist in the Emirates. I think I will conclude here, and will be available for any further questions after this session. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Hamad. Thank you so much for enlightening us. I mean, it's clear that over the past years, human rights defenders have been arbitrarily arrested, and clearly it's because owing to their status as human rights defenders, and shockingly, beyond their sentence. But let's maybe build up on this discussion, and as build up on Hamad's as well, brief comments on freedom of expression in the context of COP28 now. I'll give the floor to Ahmed, who's an Emirati writer and journalist and human rights defender. Maybe he would be able to enlighten us about the current state of freedom of expression in the Emirates. I mean, how would you, qualify the civic space in the UAE?
Hi everyone, good morning, and thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to talk about the human rights situation in the United Arab Emirates. It's actually now recognized as one of the worst situation for the human rights in the region. Today, I'm going to talk about my experience throughout my life and the others people's life, the prisoners and the detainees, and the family of the detainees, and the people of the United Arab Emirates who lost their freedom and their freedom of speech and their civil society as well. Today, actually, we are facing a big problem, seeing that the government of the UAE rejecting all that amount of recommendation which comes from the UN and from the people who care about the human rights in the world. And when we see that, we are really care about the environment where we are especially waiting and preparing for the COP28. The people who does not care about, who do not care about the human rights, will they care about the environment? Will they care about the climate rights? We understand that the rights of this earth and the right of our land to begin with the human rights. So now I'm going to give you some examples from my experience and the others' experience. If we talk about the civil society, we are talking about how the government in the UAE try to control all that life and even the right of people to have associations. If you go in the United Arab Emirates to establish any association, you have to get the approval from the intelligence department. You can't go through anything without them. And if they see any ideology or idea that it's not comes from the government or agree with the government, it will be rejected immediately. And that's what happened. Moreover, they closed many of the association, which actually like the Judist Association in the United Arab Emirates, and that was established by Dr. Hamad Mansour. Dr. Hamad Mansour, he is one of the 94 who is in prison and who completed his sentence. And then that association was led by Dr. Muhammad al-Rukn, who really known as a human rights defender globally. He was leading that association until in 2011 they closed that association and they they established a new one which is controlled by the government, and they try to clear the the reputation, the bad reputation that they have in human rights and what we face in the United Arab Emirates. People in the United Arab Emirates cannot speak freely. They don't have freedom of speech. So if we talk about the COP28, when the people want to talk freely about the environment and what happens there, how can they talk with the government who close the mouths of the people, cannot talk freely, even their citizens? Now, moreover, the punishment does not go only for those people who were known as activists in the society. No, it goes for their families as well. If I want to talk about my situation and other detainees' situations, that most of our family are banned from travel and banned from work as well. They cannot work, most of them. And more of that, some of them could not get the treatment, the health treatment in the hospital. We can't imagine, some of the people can't imagine that happen in the United Arab Emirates, which has a really big media machine showing the civilization there developed, and very good civilization, and the dreamland for many people to live there. But the experience that the people has there, it shows there is a human rights violations there, and we have to work on it. And if I talk about the detainees again, who were activists in the civil society and the human rights as well, can you imagine, while we are talking here, and while this crucial gathering about the human rights and the climate rights together, from 5 months now, no one knows anything about them. No phone call, no visiting. 5 months, no one knows anything about them, even their families. So where are they? What is happening to them? No one knows. And no one can ask the government as well. If the family try to reach them or to just chase what is happening to them, there is no way to get any answer from the government. So this government, who rejected all that amount of recommendation, which is for the people of the United Arab Emirates, it's actually proud of what it does. How can we see that as this free world, and this world which actually established by the freedom of the people? We can see that, and we see the other governments support this country to have and to host this big event like the COP28. Unfortunately, I can't cover everything that happens in the human rights issue or in the United Arab Emirates, but we can go through the recommendations to see what are the problems. The biggest issue that when you go for the judicial system in the United judicial system, in the United Arab Emirates, there is no system like that. And if you have a problem there, like any of the association which had a lot of problems to be established in the United Arab Emirates, they have no place to go or to have a right trial against the government. And this is one of the biggest issues in the United Arab Emirates. It's sad, actually. It's sad to see this problem in the United Arab Emirates. And this is my country. I love my country. I love my people. sadly, I'm talking about this issue. I am one of the people who has, I don't know how many years that I have for sentence, but every time that they tell me there is another trial against you, and I don't know how many now. What I know is 40, maybe 40 years. So sad to sit here and talk about the human rights, but this is our obligation to tell you about that. But it is more actually sadness in our heart to see the people, the government, the other people who support this problem in the United Arab Emirates, and it's increased every day. And we see those government give us their back without saying anything for this government. Today we call the United Arab Emirates government and the other government to clear its reputation by releasing the people, the innocent people, and to release the civil society in the United Arab Emirates to do its part as a civilization world. Thank you very much. Thank you for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you so much, Ahmed, for your moving intervention. And yeah, I mean, we can clearly see that there seems to be, a clear, modus operandi that's kind of happening, to silence dissidents intentionally. So maybe on this, Matthew would be able to enlighten us. Matthew Hedges is a British academic. He was detained in solitary confinement in the UAE, falsely accused of spying for the British government. His research focused on the state security apparatus in the UAE, and which is why I would like to ask you, if you could give us an overview of this modus operandi in the UAE and the crackdown on public dissent as was described by Ahmed.
Good morning, good afternoon. Thank you very much, everyone, for attending and participating. So we've heard a lot about the systemic nature of repression and poor human rights in the UAE, and I'll try to expand, and I'll try to use some of my personal experience as well as my research, which helps to really demonstrate this. We've heard that the UAE at the Universal Periodic Review was given a very large list of recommendations, and that it has only increased. This proves that there's a huge gap between what the state itself likes to promote, what it likes to market and advertise, and we see this in sports, we see this at international organizations, but this then conflicts with the truth, with that failing human rights culture within the state. My own country has been forced to sit back and acknowledge its own failing, where I was tortured in the UAE, and that the UK government, didn't acknowledge those signs, and has had to come back and respond and apologize formally. But by having the UK government do this, it's also a very clear indication, even discreetly, that there is an understanding that human rights issues are of grave concern in the state. When I've tried to raise these issues, and I believe the panel here, and as well as Hamad online, when we do try to discuss these issues and bring it to the attention, we personally are attacked, we are harassed, we are intimidated. But this is still from a perceived level of safety from abroad. this isn't the same for those Emiratis that are within the state, where those restrictions by the State Security Authority and the complete centralized direction of the judicial system means they are permanent victims of that state. So it's really, really, really important to be able to exploit and to build upon the observations of international states, to acknowledge whatever recommendations that the UAE has accepted and implemented, but then, as was previously mentioned, to also target and raise the issues that the UAE have noted. So when Hamad spoke about the lack of providing protections for persons working with the United Nations, when we are so close to the UAE hosting COP, the United Nations Climate Conference, can any state truly, are they able to provide the safety and security for their own citizens when attending this conference? But sadly, this repression, this control, is also international. So last year, when I was presenting and testifying at the Committee Against Torture here in Geneva, the Emirati delegation were harassing and trying to intimidate me and some other members of the panel. And 6 months later, they had published, or they were trying to publish, a dossier with photographs throughout my detention. They were trying to shape a narrative that they had treated me well, but by also trying to disseminate and publish this document, this dossier, by members of the delegation from the Committee Against Torture, they had also incriminated themselves in this harassment campaign. So if this is against me as a British national, where my state is supposed to be protecting me from this, yet they've had to apologize for failing to do this, for Emirati citizens themselves, that safety and security is completely missing. It simply doesn't exist. And you fight a permanent, persistent battle in every way of life. It really is, it's crucial to understand and to show from the Universal Periodic Review that while there has been a continuous education and understanding about the UAE's human rights deficiencies, what completely undercuts nearly every single aspect and every dimension is the Emirati State Security Authority, where a criminal code may exist, where other issues such as the training of Ministry of Interior employees, or trying to improve the cultural dimensions by which human rights are protected. Whenever state security would like to, when they are engaged or involved, nothing else matters, and it rids any protections afforded to individuals. When states have tried to raise this, they are simply rejected. They are noted for this. But it's so crucial to be able to demonstrate and understand that without that clear evidence of what that UAE state security law is, what the experiences are of victims within the UAE State Security Authority, it's impossible to really know the depth of this repression, this systemic repression within the state. And I think I'll leave it there, but thank you very much for taking the time to listen.
Yeah, thank you so much, Matthew, for your intervention, your testimony. You know, we have a quite personal approach to everything we've been saying. So, you know, building up on the modus operandi, I'm going to give the floor to Brian Dooley, who is a senior advisor at Human Rights First, Washington-based NGO. And for the last 3 years, he was senior advisor to the UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights Defenders. He actually has reported from the UAE on the crackdown on civil dissent there. And he's been a long-term critic of the US government's relationship with the Emirates. Brian, I want to ask you if you could comment. We've seen that there was, you know, the rejection of all recommendations that were about ratifying convention, about changing domestic law, about anything that was pushing the Emirates to be in line with international law and, you know, revise its legal framework. Maybe you could comment on that, comment on the legal framework of the UAE operating for the crackdown of human rights defenders.
Sure. Does this work? Can you hear me? Yep. Okay, thanks very much. Thank you very much for those who've organised this today too. I want to talk just a little about the UAE's response to the UPR. I'm generally a big fan of the UPR, actually. There's plenty parts of the UN that I'm not a fan of. But I think the UPR system does allow the opportunity for civil society to get together. In many countries, it rarely gets together to work on the same project, and the UPR process encourages that. Also encourages NGOs within a country and international NGOs working on that country to come together. Now, in the case of the UAE, there just isn't really civil society in the country anymore. But it does allow the opportunity for those international organisations who work on the UAE to come together and coalesce around submissions to the UPR. So I think that's a good thing. The response of the UAE to the UPR was, I think, pretty predictable. I watched the UAE official the other day responding to the recommendations by saying fairly classically for a dictatorship, we're working on a new human rights plan. Now, for anybody who is likely to be asked to engage on this plan, whether that's international NGOs or the UN, OHCHR, other states, I'd say don't get sucked into that conversation. It's a time-wasting scam. The UAE does not need to list a whole new set of policies to tell itself it shouldn't be torturing people or shouldn't be putting people in prison without a fair trial. It already has, under Article 26 of its own constitution, a prohibition on people being tortured. So it does too in Article 2 of its criminal code. Articles 28, 30 and 33 of its own constitution are supposed to protect already people's right to a fair trial, to freedom of expression, to freedom of assembly. Article 94, the irony, Article 94 is supposed to protect the judiciary from outside interference and to make it independent. Now, it already has these laws and it's not respecting them. It doesn't need to spend years. It's already been at this national action plan for 3 years, consulting, researching, looking at options. It doesn't need to do any of that. Before, it just respects its own constitution. If you get drawn into a conversation with a UAE official who is promoting the national human rights plan as a response to its UPR, don't get conned into that conversation. Don't get distracted. Keep the conversation on why aren't you already respecting your own constitution? Why are you torturing people and why aren't your torturers in jail? Why aren't you letting people go at the end of their sentences? Why aren't you letting international human rights organizations into your country? The UAE does these things because it wants to and it can. And the restraint from the international community is just too weak to prevent it doing that. I was in the UAE 7 or 8 years ago, and I spent some time with Ahmed Mansour, obviously before he was put in prison. He and I, for many years, were both on the advisory council of the Gulf Center for Human Rights. And although I've worked in, reported from various dictatorships over the years, and I don't really like to compare, but the UAE just tasted different. I mean, there was a fear right across anybody who was doing any sort of even very mild dissent of state security and its powers. And really, I was there at a time that the last remnants of dissent and civil society were being wiped out. I also worked for a while when I was part of Mary Lawlor's team with Ala al-Siddiqui in London. And I saw firsthand the sort of life that she had to live. I mean, she'd come and meet me, and she just had put out, I mean, it was, you know, we'd laugh about it, but several phones when we'd meet at a coffee shop, because she knew that she was being targeted, she knew she'd been hacked, she had to take all sorts of security precautions in London, living in London, about where she lived, which floor of an apartment block she lived at, the entrances, the exits. Matthew's already mentioned the intimidation of the state security's reach here in Geneva. One thing I'd say too about the UAE's record is it's particularly pernicious in that it has expansionist desires. I mean, you know, Dubai isn't Vegas, right? What happens in Dubai doesn't stay in Dubai, right? We've seen meddling to the detriment of Somalia, Sudan, Libya, Egypt. It's buying up large swathes of Zimbabwe. So it's not, I mean, it would be bad enough if these terrible human rights violations were contained in the UAE, but the UAE is now expanding with massive and pernicious influence to other countries too. And I think it's clearly way beyond time for the international community to get its act together to try to sanction the UAE. I think the UPR helps, but really, unless you're going to keep at them and keep that conversation on why aren't you doing what you've promised to do already, then they're just going to get away with more waffle and more blather, and it's going to be, we'll wait for the new National Action Plan, then we'll respond to your UPRs. I like, when I can, to end on a note of optimism. It's not always easy. But I would say that, you know, one of the big influences still on the UAE is Washington. And a small glimmer of hope over the last week or so when, for various odd reasons, there is now a new senator who's chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, Ben Cardin, and he's suddenly taken a very different line on the US relationship with Egypt, which is a very positive thing to see. Let's hope that extends to him taking a similar line on the US relationship with UAE, conditionality on cooperation with the UAE on human rights, hopefully some sanctions against at least some of his torturers, but we'll see. I'm going to end it there. I think there are other questions to answer, but to sum up really, don't get distracted into this National Action Plan conversation. It's a con, it's nonsense. Keep the conversation on why they're not living up to their own constitution.
Thank you so much, Brian. And I've heard you say like a very important sentence. You said, what happens in Dubai doesn't stay in Dubai. And maybe just if we can like build up on this very quickly, I can ask, you know, all the panelists if they want to comment. We've been hearing a lot of cases of transnational repression in the UAE. Recently, the case of Rumaisi has shaken the world. And you know, it seems like this is a pattern to silence dissidents, and I don't know if any of you want to comment also, like, in relationship to cyber surveillance, to this whole transnational discourse that we have. You know, the floor is yours if you want to comment. Ahmed, maybe you want to comment on this?
Yeah, actually, I agree totally with that, because this is like an infection that can go through in the region first, then it will go more and more. In the Arab Spring, the infection was good for all the region. Yeah, the infection came for the freedom and for the democracy. And at that time, in Dubai, what happened, actually, it was, there was a petition from the people of UAE. having a hope that the good infection come to them. But unfortunately, the other side, which is we say the war against the democracy in the region, comes from the UAE. And we saw how that the region affected in Yemen, in Egypt, in Syria, everywhere, that we see that the reflection of aggression comes there. Will that stop in the region only? No, I don't think so. All the government now who support this behavior and this action in the United Arab Emirates, they will be affected in the future with this problem. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Matthew, maybe you want to comment as well on this? Here.
Thank you. So, in terms of the UAE's ability to enact an increasingly powerful transnational network of transnational repression, is from the top down, having the UAE having the presidency of Interpol, because while it may be to a degree, they try to market it as a non-active role. It is still very much intertwined with the organization's direction, with the signaling to other states that we're going to turn a blind eye to your activities, whilst we also do the same. And we can see examples of the UAE, how it's supported other states to do this since Major General Nasser al-Raisi became the president of Interpol. Then we see the impact on Emirati nationals themselves. Spoke about Allah, we spoke about Ahmed here, Hamad, and many others. The state can simply choose to make them Badoon, to take away their nationality. But we've also seen an increasing number of Emiratis being given asylum in Western states. And this is also a very clear demonstration that there is a growing acknowledgement of the vulnerability that these citizens have. Then lastly, when it comes down to the digital sphere, which is what you were later asking about, unlike military weapons where you would need to have certain formalities for purchases, to have registrations, the domain of spyware is really the Wild West. It's completely anarchic. Laws, legislations, they simply don't exist. And the only limitation is supposed to be a goodwill from one side or another. The UAE has a small citizenship population, so to have the ability to train, to be able to do this indigenously is only small by comparison to, say, the military, where you can train these people up and it's quite simple. But for digital capabilities, it's a double-sided coin, because you don't want them to be too powerful, because then they would know how to evade it. And so they export, or they import those capabilities, and they export requirements to other states to do this on their behalf. And the only reason truly that we know about it is because of engagements that have been caught. I myself was caught in Pegasus. My barrister was caught up in this, as well as many others. This was part of my arrest. They had hacked my phone when I was in the UK before I had left. But whether it's successful or not, it is the psychological impact that it has. So when Brian spoke about Allah and many others, where you would have multiple phones when you try to live several different digital lives, that's having the impact that they want already. And I think it's so crucial to understand. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Matthew. I don't know if Hamad wants to comment as well, if he's still online.
Yes, actually, I'm still online, but I don't have any comment on this. I think they said enough. Yeah.
Great, thank you so much, Hamad. I actually have a follow-up before opening the floor to the public. I have a follow-up question to Brian because of his experience as an advisor to the UN Special Rapporteur. I was wondering whether you could give us some. Tell us more about the mandate of the Special Rapporteur, what has been done by the mandate with regards to UAE and the protection of human rights defenders there.
Yep, thanks very much. I mean, you heard from Mary earlier, and I am no longer a senior advisor, so I don't want to speak for her, but I can explain just very quickly what the mandate and other Special Rapporteur mandates can do. It's pretty limited. They sit sort of on the fringe, as I see it, of the UN system. All the Special Rapporteurs are volunteers. They have to be appointed by the Human Rights Council, usually for 3 years. It can be renewed once. And what they can do in terms of engagement with a country like the UAE is that they can request to meet UAE officials. The implication, I think, is that they're more likely to get an audience with those officials than NGOs and others. They can write, Mary mentioned there, what are called communications, basically letters of complaint or letters which raise human rights violations issues. Now, in the case of the Special Rapporteur on Human Rights Defenders, that has to stick strictly within the confines of who is identified as a human rights defender, but then there are others around torture and freedom of expression and freedom of assembly and association and so on. I mean, to get super geeky about it, what happens is a Special Rapporteur writes to, let's say, the UAE and says, we believe that these people are wrongly jailed or these people have been tortured. The UAE gets 60 days to respond to that. During those 60 days, this correspondence is confidential. After 60 days, the initial letter complaining is posted on the UN website with any response that's been received from the UAE in that time. So, I mean, the HRD mandate is the one I know best, and as Mary said, she's written, I think, joined or led 5 or 6 of these communications during her 3 years. The UAE sometimes responds, sometimes it doesn't. No state is obliged to respond at all. If you look on the website there of these correspondences, just blank there for the last 1 or 2. Before that, when they did respond, they just basically denied it. You're calling this person a human rights defender, but they were given a full fair trial. They were convicted of these very serious charges. This is why they've been sentenced to 10 years or whatever. That's sort of the bread and butter of what a Special Rapporteur can do. Of course, they can mention the UAE in the 2 reports every year they have to officially present to the UN. And then there is another side procedure, I guess, which is that once a year, another part of the UN from the Secretary General's office lists all those countries which have attacked human rights defenders or activists for trying to engage with the UN. So, for instance, if someone comes to Geneva and then they're arrested on their return to Dubai or whatever it is, then they get put in that. I think states, for whatever reason, tend to be pretty sensitive to being listed in that. But that's the nuts and bolts of what any of the special procedures the Special Rapporteurs can do. As I say, they can't compel the UAE to let them in. They have to be invited in formally. The Special Rapporteur on the independence of judges and lawyers was invited in 2014. I think they didn't go quite as swimmingly for the UAE as they had hoped. And as I say, the UAE does not even have to respond. No country has to respond to these letters of raising human rights violations.
Thank you so much, Brian. I think I'm going to open the floor to the public now. I don't know. I'm not sure I have access to the online questions, but I don't know if someone for now has any questions in person.
I'll pass you the microphone.
Thanks. It seems like there's a lot of actions that the UN is taking. You know, there's all the special mechanisms, the working groups, the special rapporteurs that you've all explained. You know, the UPR report that just came out. It's clearly a real indictment of the human rights situation in the UAE. I mean, 323 recommendations on how to improve your human rights doesn't seem very good. But so what is it that states should be doing to push for human rights to improve in the UAE? It seems like the UN is doing everything it can, and, well, I mean, within the limits of the UN, but it seems as though more definitely needs to be done. So what is it that you think that you know, independent states should be doing to push for an improvement in human rights in the UAE? For everyone on the panel, whoever wants to answer it.
I don't know if anyone in the panel wants to take the floor, or should I get? So I don't know if Hamad, maybe you want to take the floor, and then I'll give. I don't know if you have any comments.
I can. Nobody can speak. I can speak about this. Yeah, yeah. Thank you for the questions. I think there are a lot can be done on this regard. First of all, like when it comes to the states, I think the states should say publicly that they should not, tolerate with having violations of human rights in any country in the world, like especially in the Emirates. And like on the same time, Emirates are hosting a lot of, worldwide events such as COP28, Expo, and these kind of things. And now being, the problem that the UAE is being rewarded for these kind of violations. So they now the head of Interpol from the UAE, they host Expo last year, 2020, and now they are hosting COP28. And this is very ironic that these kind of events need to have an infrastructure of a freedom of expression, civil society, civic space, and all of these doesn't exist in the UAE. And even though the UAE is still hosting these kind of events. So I think the first message should be sent to the UAE that these prisoners of conscience should not be in prison and should be released immediately. Having these prisoners of conscience, this is a message that, we do not have a free civic space inside the UAE. And also, like on the same times, I was discussing this a lot with the friends in the past years. We know that the UN doesn't have a power over the country to force them to do anything. But I think they can improve their instruments. They can do more things to force the country to adhere with the human rights mechanism. Like, for example, I believe, I'm suggesting, and maybe Brian can elaborate on this. For example, now, if we suggest there is a ranking for every country, and any country doesn't cooperate with a UN mechanism, they should get a certain kind of degrees, by the end of the year. And if this country doesn't, if they have a certain ranking, they should not be a member of Human Rights Council. You cannot be a member of Human Rights Council and you do not cooperate with the Human Rights Council mechanism. And you cannot host a UN event and you, in the same time, you are not cooperating with the mechanism of UN. So I think if we, suggest a mechanism or a ranking mechanism or a ranking instrument, and by the end of every year, based on how the UAE or how the government is, cooperating with this mechanism, and we give them a rank or degree or something or grade, and we put them by the end of the year on a certain ranking, I think by this we will force the states, not only UAE, but all the states in the world to, cooperate more with these mechanisms. So this is like, I'm not really sure how can we advocate or how can we push for such suggestions. But this is, it came to my mind. Yeah, thank you.
So because of if you're asking how states can interact or how they should, how their relationship should be with the UAE and about holding their their behavior to account, there should also be an acknowledgement that, because it's happening at that top international level, it is always going to be inherently political. So when this does come, it will come with force. So instead of trying some of these more perceivably hostile acts by the UAE, if you want to change the behavior, try to be proactive in the reporting or in the acknowledgement of the limitations and abuses that take place. Because the second that you are reactive to an event, one, you're less likely to do anything, but two, it would also come across as a hostile, critical act. If you were, for the UK, for Switzerland, for France, whoever it is, to have a blanket approach to reporting and acknowledging the limitations of human rights in the UAE, and to update this every year, this is then a template that is known to then be reported on. If you were to then do this or try to come down hard in response to a certain event, it doesn't have that same values-based power that continues. The other option, and it's much more personal, emotional, it's much more the idea, and I don't speak for anybody else, but I think it's important to highlight it, is when Emiratis or Emirati dissidents, or not just Emiratis, but other dissidents in a third country as an asylum holder, they are then treated, or they are exploited to an extent by the host country to gain favor with the UAE in this case. So why would they be? Why do they have to go through extra security and checks at the airport? For what reason? Does this happen with all asylum seekers, or is it specific to certain allies? If this is the case, why? Why is this third country acting nearly on behalf of the abusing state? And it's to ensure the separation of this, so that those third countries are not implicit, they are not active in the sustained suppression and resilience. And for that, really, it's about asking for clarification, for accountability, and trying to, by asking for those types of answers from the UAE, you also get more respect by standing on a position and not being flimsy and changing direction the whole time.
Actually, about this issue, it's a really very important issue, and we should encourage those states to do something. And first of all, they have to feel the dangers that can come to them and can be extended to them. And if we get an example like Matthew's example, Matthew is a UK citizen who visited United Arab Emirates, and he faced violence there, and UK government could not do anything. What is that? That can happen everywhere. That can be extended for all the nationalities, all the people. So it is very important to feel that, and to feel the responsibility. And feeling the responsibility that go and extend for these recommendations, and I think the states can play great part in that by asking, the states can ask the UAE governments about those recommendations. Why didn't you do anything with that? And they have a really great part, because the UN is their association, and they have to protect it. If they see any state in the world ignore this big association, this big organization, what's the reason of it and what the reason of these requirements. And the other thing, taking Matthews, I give many examples about you, but this is about how the United Arab Emirates governments take advance action by threatening the other government. They have to reject this threats come from the United Arab Emirates, especially with the money. Okay, we have a lot of money. So we play with that. The government play with that. So they threat even and give a pressure, some pressure upon those governments, like the UK government, until they rejected even the blame come from its citizen. So this is one, I think this is one of the things that they can do. Yeah.
Brian, would you like to comment as well?
Yes, I would. You know, we often hear states who talk big about human rights when they're asked to publicly criticize a state like the UAE, saying, you know, our hands are tied, there's nothing we can do. That's all nonsense. You'll hear in December of this year many of the states who fancy themselves as champion of human rights talk about the importance of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It will be the 75th anniversary of the EDHR in December, also the 25th anniversary of the UN Declaration on Human Rights Defenders. And you can bet that many Western European states, plenty others, the Biden administration says it has human rights at the heart of its foreign policy. All of those states and others could this week, tonight, do a series of things that would cost them no money. They could publicly call for the release by name of the prisoners of conscience in the UAE. They could publicly announce that state visits at a senior level from the UAE will not be issued until those people are released. They can demarche the UAE diplomats. They can say that their ambassadors to the UAE are going to publicly request access to go and see those people in prison. And they can say that they intend to instigate a series of Magnitsky-type individual sanctions against torturers and others in the UAE. All of those states could do all of that this week. So don't, again, get conned with these conversations of it's all very complicated, there's nothing we can do, we need to balance our equities. It's really not rocket science. If you want to call for human rights improvements in another country, you can do it publicly, and you can do it immediately.
Thank you so much to all the panelists. Do we have maybe another question in person? I would like just to let you know that the questions should be short and the answers should be short as well. we don't have too much time.
Robert James Parsons, independent journalist. What is behind the oppression? And when I was focused on Bahrain and for quite a while writing about it, I found often behind the scenes Saudi Arabia. For me, Saudi Arabia is quite explicable. You have the insecurity of the royal family, you have the Wahhabi clergy, and so on. And these forces are exercising power in various ways that becomes very oppressive. What is the interest of the government of the UAE to be so oppressive? What are they afraid of, in other words?
I can start.
Yeah, okay, please go ahead, Hamad. Great.
Yeah, I'll try to make it short. Before 2011, we had a very limited freedom inside the UAE. But after 2011, everything has changed. And why 2011 exactly? Because in 2011, there was a petition, and that petition was calling for a political reform. And this is very minor political reform. Frankly speaking, nobody, any authoritarian regime do not want their people to be part of the political procedure, political processing, decision making. So that petition called for a political reform and calling for a free election inside the UAE. So the United Arab Emirates will not allow, they will not tolerate with anyone would like to have, a kind of a freedom of election. After the date of the petition, the UAE government started to harass a lot of activists inside the UAE. So I can say very short, so I will not take a lot of your time. They do not want to share this privilege with the people of UAE. They do not want to have a political freedom inside the UAE, and they will not allow people inside the UAE to have a free election. This is what they are fearing of.
Does anyone else from the panelists would like to comment on this?
It's maximizing control in the most simple way. Mohammed bin Zayed and his brothers that have risen up have a predominantly security and military background. The UAE was a federation as a state. It still claims to be a federation as a state, but ultimately the power has concentrated so much within the capital, and it has done over a process of say, several decades. But alongside that has been the parallel elevation of the state security, and daily life is so, it's directly controlled. The leverage is everywhere, and you see it across daily life, either overtly or discreetly. But the next level is then for Emirati citizens, as a tribe, as tribes, as family, as blood kin, whatever leverage or aspect, dimension to repression is heightened because those connections are stronger between them.
Thanks so much. Maybe Ahmed would like as well to.
No, actually, I will put that in order, like what said Hamad. I totally agree with Hamad and totally agree with Matthew as well. But this is in order. First of all, they did not want to share the people in the political life, and this is the first step. And when they saw themselves so powerful that they could control everything, their hunger come to extend their power more and more, as Matthew said. So that's go for all the region, and they become aggressive. They see this is the good strategy to control all the region. Yeah.
I'll be very quick. I mean, getting into the psyche of these totalitarian regimes is fascinating. I really don't understand it, but you do see that totalitarian regimes really want total control. Like 98% control isn't enough. There's a huge machinery there in the case of the UAE, the state security, and they just need to stamp out any possible hint of dissent. I think it reveals a fragility, a brittleness that they're scared of. People tweeting mild criticism of the government. I think that's weak and insecure. But I think once you have this machinery already built that we need to stamp out dissent, then it finds it difficult to pull back, and it just needs more and more control. And I think, as we've seen in other dictatorships, eventually that leads to it toppling over. But I think at its root, it's a fear and insecurity of why it's behaving so violently.
I think it's a great way to end this panel on these words that you've all said, maximizing control, total control, which might explain the 40% rejection of the UPR recommendations. So yeah, I will end the panel here. I'll give the floor to Isabelle Falconier and thank our panelists for their time and their attention and their great intervention. Thank you.
Thank you, Falah, for chairing this press conference. Thank you very much for being with us this morning. Thank you to our 4 speakers. Well, thank you, Ahmed and Matthew, for your very strong testimonies, and thank you for your attention, ladies and gentlemen, this midday, and thank you to attention also online, and thank you, and please come back again at Geneva Press Club. Thank you.